Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. Coming up this week, why are pro teams not racing to sign the rider taking the world's most prestigious Strava KOMs? I'll also wrap up the second round of the UCI Cyclocross World Cup from Dublin and the latest rounds of the UCI Track Champions League. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that bunch racing on the track is not for the faint of heart.
Oh, what a big crash, a huge crash! More than half the peloton down here. And that's a disaster, Joe. There are only 5 riders out of the whole bunch who are still on the track right now.
Ouch. More on that later on. We also learned that Maxim van Heels has left Lotto Destiny. Off the back of Connor's lead story on last week's show, the two parties confirmed on Thursday that they will indeed part ways. That said, his new team is yet to be confirmed. Red Bull, Bora Hansgrohe are still the favourites, but Visma, Astana and Ineos are also rumoured to be in the mix. We also learned that Tadej Pogačar might be on a new bike next season. Colnago teased a new model on their Instagram account last week with just a picture of some new aero bars, but then some pictures emerged on the Weight Weenies forum of what looks to be a fairly radical new aero bike design. We don't know whether or not this is the actual bike, but it will be revealed by Colnago this time next week on the 9th of December. Finally this week, we learned that Jack Burke has nabbed another very prestigious Strava KOM. If you've never heard of Jack Burke, he's a 29-year-old Canadian who spent a few years trying to turn pro. He moved to Europe in 2019 and spent a few years in continental level teams, predominantly in Austria, but he didn't manage to turn his dream into a reality. At the start of this year, he'd all but given up hope, but he was persuaded to give it one last shot by his coach, Steve Neal. Why am I telling you this? Well, because Burke has been making a name for himself over the last few weeks by grabbing 3 of the most well-known KOMs in the world. It all started with the Mortirolo in Italy, a fearsomely steep climb with an average gradient in double digits. There, in the middle of November, he smashed the previous record by over a minute. That record was held by none other than Vincenzo Nibali, who'd set it at the 2019 Giro d'Italia. It was in a video recorded at the top of that climb where Burke revealed that he'd also broken the record up the Stelvio, taking that one from Jai Hindley. Now, just last week, he added arguably the most prestigious of them all, Alpe d'Huez. The ride had actually been done on the 11th of November, but either way, conditions were far from ideal. At the foot of the climb, it was 5 degrees Celsius, and for the last couple of kilometres, temperatures were around freezing. He couldn't even take his own helmet off at the summit, but he had accomplished his goal. He'd taken the KOM there by 9 seconds from Sepp Kuss, who'd set it at the 2022 Tour de France. There, Kuss crossed the line just 3 seconds behind the likes of Pogačar and Vingegaard. So, 3 of the most famous mountains in cycling now have Jack Burke at the top of the Strava table. His mission? To finally get a shot in a big-time pro team so he can see how he fares against the best climbers in the world. As yet, though, as far as we know, the offers haven't been forthcoming, although it does sound like there is a chance. But why are teams not queuing up at his door to get his signature? Well, I think there are probably a few reasons. The first is his age. He's 29, as I said before. 29 isn't old per se, but at a time when teams are signing riders at an ever younger age, it would be seen as a bit of a risk. That said, it's the same age that Mike Woods was when he got his chance in a World Tour level team, and only a couple of years older than Primož Roglič was when he signed with Jumbo-Visma. They've both done all right, haven't they? The big difference between them and Burke, though, is that Burke has spent a few years racing in Europe without any really standout results. He finished top 20 at the Tour de Slovenia, won by Pogačar in 2022, and has had a couple of solid results elsewhere, but nothing that really stands out as this guy could be one of the best climbers in the world. I mean, he clearly is. You don't take those KOMs if you aren't one of the best climbers in the world. Admittedly, he tackled them fresh, whereas the riders that he beat were deep into a Grand Tour and doing those climbs deep into a stage. But Burke is the first to admit that. Pro riders, though, would also be the first to admit that the times he set are world-class, fresh or not. However, that's one of the key differences between top pros and top amateurs: resistance to fatigue. Plenty of riders around the world can put out the same sprint power as Mark Cavendish, for example, but it's his ability to put out that power at the end of a stage, at the end of a 5-minute effort of well over 400 watts in the carnage that is a Tour de France sprint, that separates him from most others. Climbs are different, of course, but you still need to be able to put out that power at the end of a 5-hour stage, 2.5 or 3 weeks into a Grand Tour, to be up there with the best. And that's not just about fatigue resistance. That's about your ability to get there as fresh as possible, how efficient you are in the bunch at saving energy, keeping out of the wind, positioning yourself at the right moments, handling your bike, not having to make unnecessary efforts. They all make a huge difference to how well you perform day after day, week after week. I've personally seen plenty of riders in my time who've got huge power numbers that I looked at and thought they should be one of the best riders in the World Tour, but for whatever reason, they couldn't quite cut it. There's just a lot more that goes into a successful rider than just good data. Yes, you do need good physiology, but you also need to be the complete package if you want to make it to the top. Now, I'm not saying that Jack Burke isn't the complete package. I don't know him well enough to know. I'm just speculating as to the reasons why he hasn't got the results you expect from someone who can ride at 6.5 watts per kilo for over 40 minutes. There are a lot of world-class riders actually earning very good money who would love to be able to produce the numbers that Burke is. It's quite possible that teams are looking at the years he spent racing in Europe and just wondering why he didn't get more standout results with the talent that he's clearly got. The other issue is that most teams are now full. You'll notice at the end of this show that there's not really much transfer news because, apart from Maxim van Giels, there hasn't really been any. Most top-level teams have filled their rosters by now, which means that even if they were interested in Burke, they probably don't have the room. Maybe Lotto Destiny will want to refill their last spot. That might work. Now, it's not unprecedented for riders to turn pro through their rides posted to Strava. The most high-profile and recent example probably is Jonas Vingegaard. Back in 2018, he and his team successfully set out to break the record up the Col de Rates in Spain, which is enough to get Jumbo-Visma interested. The rest, as they say, is history. So I, for one, hope that Jack Burke does get the opportunity he wants. The rides he's produced over the last month are genuinely incredibly impressive by anybody's standards, and it really feels like he deserves his chance at the big time to see if he can compete in the big stage. Nobody's expecting him to be the next Jonas Vingegaard, but even if he achieves a fraction of that, he'll be a bargain. Also, give him a 1-year contract, and he'll almost certainly give you a good return on your investment, as we'll all be watching him with great interest to see how he gets on in the pro peloton. Anyway, let me know your thoughts. If you were a team boss, would you sign him? If not, why not? Also, which team do you think should sign him? Where would he fit in best? Let me know in the comment section just down below. And good luck, Jack, in getting that pro contract. Right, on to cyclocross now, and the second round of the World Cup in Dublin. Sailing Del Carmen Alvarado skipping the race due to fatigue. There were two big favourites in the women's race, Fem van Empel and Lucinda Brandt, winners of the two previous World Cups in Dublin. Let's face it though, Van Empel was the big favourite. She's hardly been beaten in UCI World Cups in the last year. However, things didn't go to plan for her. An early puncture was her first problem, but after a bike change, she managed to get herself back on terms. Then, though, there was a mistake in the sand that was her ultimate undoing, and the one that Brandt took advantage of. It came on the fourth lap of 6, and once the gap was there, it continued to grow pretty much all the way to the finish line. For Brandt, that was her first World Cup victory in almost a year, and for Van Empel, her first defeat in almost a year at World Cup level. Behind them, it was Zoe Bagstedt, who was also third in Dublin this time last season. Bagstedt is now third overall in the World Cup series, level on points with Marie Schreiber, fellow under-23 rider. In the men's, there was some very close racing throughout. European champion Thibaut Nace had another mishap, crashing over the hurdles and later pulling out of the race. Aert, Oort, Isabit, Visura, Ron Hart and Van Turenhout spent pretty much the whole race battling it out together. Van Turenhout looked to be on the back foot on the fourth lap, almost literally, as he had to change his shoe, but he soon got back into contention to the front of the race. A small error by Isabit on the last lap allowed his teammate Van Turenhout to accelerate ahead of the rest, so he came to the line in first place, 1 second ahead of Toon Aert, with Felipe Oort putting in another solid performance for third. With Isabit in fourth, it means Van Turenhout also takes over the World Cup Series lead from him, meaning that Pauwels, Sauers and Bingo have the top two overall. The series will continue with round 3 in Cabras, Italy this coming Sunday. And a reminder, you'll be able to watch that, plus the final 2 rounds of the UCI Track Champions League, live on Discovery Plus or Max, where you can watch a full season of bike racing. Which brings me nicely on to the UCI Track Champions League events that took place last weekend. rounds 2 and 3, which were in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands. And as such, it seemed quite appropriate that Harry Lavreysen was back to his best. He got the better of Matthew Richardson in the sprint and then took second in the Keirin, won by Christian Ortego. Lavreysen ended the 2 Dutch rounds by taking the series leader's jersey back. But with just 5 points in hand over Richardson, it's still all to play for in the final 2 events in London. In the women's sprint events, Alina Lysenko won both the sprint and Keirin on Friday and Saturday. That means she won 5 races in succession in the series, a feat never before seen at the UCI Track Champions League. Her lead, as you can imagine, is almost unassailable at this point. Dylan Bibic retained and actually extended his lead in the men's endurance standings by taking a first and second place in the elimination race on Friday and Saturday. A huge pile-up in the event saw the final delayed, but when it resumed, Bibic took the top honours. And it was a good weekend for Canada as a whole in the endurance events, with Sarah Van Dam getting the better of Katie Archibald in the scratch race on Friday. Archibald got back on top by winning the scratch race the following day, meaning that she still has a comfortable overall lead. Van Dam is 27 points behind her in second. In other news, Harry Tanfield is trying his best to launch a new UCI continental level team here in the UK after the unfortunate news that St Piran will cease to exist as of the end of this season. With Trinity Racing also ending their road team, it's left the UK domestic scene in a bit of a sorry state, down to 0 registered UCI Conti teams from the 6 that there were just 3 years ago. Unless, that is, Tanfield can beat the race against time and get a new team off the ground within the next week. I wish him the very best of luck. It would be a beacon of light through the gloom of the British domestic scene were he to pull it off. Jonas Vingegaard has stated that he'd like to compete at the World Road Championships, which take place in Rwanda towards the end of 2025. The Dane, speaking to AD in the Netherlands, said that the course suits him well, and that's what caught his attention. In that same interview, he said that his participation at the Tour de France is certain next year, but there are no concrete plans beyond that, at least none that he's revealing just yet. Rumours that he is to compete at the Giro next year are as yet unconfirmed, so we shall see. Right, I'll finish with some transfer news, despite saying earlier there wasn't really any. This one doesn't involve a current rider, though, but rather former pro rider Steve Cummings. After his fallout with the Ineos Grenadiers this year, he's been snapped up by Jaco Alula, with whom he'll be sports director from 2025. Seems like quite a good fit, doesn't it? Right, that is all for this week, but I'll be back again next Monday, so I'll see you then.